I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
I like this car.
Your clothes.
Give them to me.
Now.
Come with me if you want to live.
Come with me if you want to live.
Come with me if you want to live.
I'll be back. I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
She'll be back.
The Terminator franchise has been one of the most influential franchises in the world of cinema. The first two films showed Hollywood what action movies can be, pushing the boundaries in a way that was not seen before. But something really weird happened to these movies after Terminator 2 Judgment Day. They stopped being good or even interesting. But why is that? The most common answer to this question is that there's nothing left to tell. But while that's true, we cannot ignore the fact that there are many franchises who had nothing left to tell but found a way to adapt and bring up some new ideas to keep the franchise going or to keep the story move forward. The recent Halloween is a good testament of that. While I think it could very well be the end of the franchise, they managed to pull off one last decent story to give the series a proper send-off and pretty much erase everything that didn't work in the process.
You need to get the hell out of here! Get out, Scoop! Skedaddle! Get the out of Dodge!
Something that Terminator Dark Fate failed miserably to do. So in my opinion, the reason we haven't been able to get a decent Terminator movie since 1991 is not only because there's no story. I think the problem lies way deeper than that. So today, I want to analyze the Terminator franchise and give my definitive answer to why most of the sequels don't work at all. The Terminator is a perfect movie. Any other opinion is wrong. The movie is intense, the action is ahead of its time, the acting is terrific. God, Arnold Schwarzenegger was terrifying in the role. This movie was James Cameron's directorial debut, a movie he and his crew crafted with passion. They left their sweat and tears every day on set. Everything in this movie feels real because it is, using practical effects, sometimes in the most insanely creative way. Like, can you believe this shot was created using a bunch of foam core and tin foil? And the smoke is just someone smoking a cigarette off screen?
None of that had been created before we shot it. We put together on the spot while we were there with Jim's direction, with his art direction and his background of putting this stuff together, built a press out of foam core. The two halves, the top and the bottom, out of foam core, sprayed them silver. We took and fabricated a little eye section of the Terminator, the thing that you see falling off, out of foam core and tin foil. And the little smoke is wafting through the shot, and the smoke is literally the smoke from a cigarette. There was someone off stage going, and we shot that shot, and it's in the film, and it works. And with all of this stuff that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the sculptures that take forever, here's this close-up image, this final close-up image that is basically foam core and tin foil and cigarette smoke, and it's the last image of the Terminator in the movie.
Yeah, Terminator was that kind of movie. It's the Evil Dead of action movies. I mean, sure, unlike the Evil Dead, much more money was put into this, but you have to understand that robots on film was not a thing back in 1984. The Terminator design came from a nightmare Cameron had once, then decided he wanted to make a movie out of it. The most fascinating aspect of the Terminator is definitely its horror angle, but what makes the film work in my opinion is how small the movie feels despite having world-ending stakes. If this one robot succeeds at killing this one random woman, humanity is lost forever. Yet 90% of the film only involves three characters. Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, who is absolutely perfect in the role and has one of the best character evolution in history of action movies. Kyle Reese, played by Michael Biehn, who is the most underrated character in the entire franchise, and after seeing Jai Courtney's performance in Genisys, I can confirm that Michael Biehn's performance should be appreciated more. He brought so much vulnerability to the character of Reese, while still making him a badass action hero you believe can kick some serious ass. And of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays the Terminator wonderfully, and unlike many people, I believe he was at his best here. He had the physique to be terrifying and believable as this killing machine. Anything after never lived up to that. And yes, in my opinion, the Terminator is better than T2. Maybe it didn't age as well as T2 as some effects look outdated, but when you realize how it was all done, you can only respect and appreciate it. When you think about how they didn't have CGI back then and had to use a mix of puppetry and stop motion animation to pull this off, it can only blow your mind. But at the end of Terminator, the Terminator is destroyed, Sarah Connor is safe and expecting baby John Connor, so you could think, that's it? But many unanswered questions arise. How do the machines take over? Can the apocalypse be stopped? These questions are not necessarily important, because even if we never got a sequel to Terminator, this ending would still be satisfying. Because the point of the movie was not the war. It wasn't about the apocalyptic future. The story was about a girl who can't even get a date, hates her job and feels empty, finding out she was humanity's last hope. She grows and changes throughout the film, falls in love, kills the deadliest machine to ever exist by herself, and is a better, stronger version of herself. This was a very empowering movie. That's why I'm confused when there are talks today about Hollywood needing more strong female characters. This movie came out in 1984 and is 10 times more empowering than Ghostbusters, Captain Marvel, or even Dark Fates. But where to go from there? Can a sequel work without ruining the first one? Well, only if the guy who created the whole thing came up with a story for the sequel, and that is exactly what happened.
It's funny that every year that went by that we didn't make the sequel, the demand for the sequel got greater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why you and I, we got together periodically and
Right.
Started working on a plan
Right.
and mapping out times to keep a certain time period blocked out so we can go and eventually down the line do
Actually,
one.
you'd call me up about once every 6 months and say, so how's it going on? No, you'd talk about other things for about 5 minutes and then, so how's Terminator 2 going?
That's right, yeah. So I mean, anyway, so that was, we were fortunate enough that it did come together and that we did make a second Terminator.
For the first Terminator, James Cameron wanted the Terminator to be played by someone who could blend in, a killing machine that could look like any other person in the crowd. They even had Lance Henriksen as the Terminator before casting Arnold in the role, while Henriksen ended up playing one of the cops, which further proves that the plan for the series was always to keep it contained, even when the stakes are high. But with T2, we are talking about a sequel to one of the best action movies ever made, so automatically the stakes needed to be higher, with more characters and bigger action set pieces, right?
Wrong.
Cameron raised the bar a bit more with the action sequences but never lost sight of what made the first one work, a contained story within a larger narrative. Once again, we get a glimpse of the future war between the humans and the machines, but this time we see adult John Connor because unlike the first one, this time he is the one who is in danger. He is the real focus. This is where the franchise could have gone crazy and have 5 to 6 Terminators with massive action sequences and explosions, but Cameron settled for something he does best: characters. Everyone in this movie is interesting, badass, and necessary. Even the T-800 gets a character arc. James Cameron took one of the most terrifying villains ever, but walked the fine line between cuteness and goofiness. The reason this change works is because the T-800 is nothing like the first Terminator, so the audience can embrace this version of the character more easily. The movie managed to make it look like by the end of the film, this robot cared about this kid without compromising the idea that it's a cyborg and cannot feel anything. What we feel is more related to John Connor's perception of the T-800, who is the closest thing he's ever had to a father, and it's brilliant. Humanizing the T-800 without turning him into an actual human being is something all the movies after this have failed to do. Sarah Connor is back. God, Linda Hamilton is so badass. And this time we get John Connor, the leader of the resistance, and like I said, everyone is essential to the story. Learn something, grow, and more importantly, this movie is not obsessed with the first one. It continues the story, so there are references to the first one, but it feels so much like its own thing. It feels like a part 2 rather than just another sequel. We were told about John Connor, now we get more information about him. We were told about the machines, now we know that the program that would destroy humanity is called Skynet. Even better, there is a way of stopping it from ever happening. And it all comes together beautifully, and to me, the Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day have always been one big movie. I don't care that there are like 5 years between the two, the story works so well when you put them together. The characters stay interesting throughout both films, and the action, even when evolving from the first to the second, keeps the same style and sense of tangibility to it. Nothing looks fake. Look at this. This is a real helicopter going under a bridge. And even when using special effects, they keep it cool, inventive, and groundbreaking. They didn't bother finding another Schwarzenegger. They tried something different. Got an actor that looked less menacing physically and put everything on the design. That's genius. Can we appreciate how cool this looks even today? The T-1000 is a badass villain and the proof that doing something different can be done in this franchise. But it looks like outside of James Cameron, no one was able to come up with something new that didn't involve undoing everything the first movie had built. And this is where the problem starts. After James Cameron walked out on the project because he felt like he was done with his characters after T2 and didn't want to work with someone else's vision, Jonathan Mostow replaced him to direct the third film because Hollywood quote-unquote didn't want to leave money on the table. The first two Terminators were game changers and everyone loved them, so why stop even when there's no story left to tell? Even better, there's no soul left in this series. James Cameron was the soul. The guy created an entire franchise out of a random nightmare he had once. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who couldn't wait for T2 to start filming, was so uninterested in the third film that he asked to be paid $29 million to come back. His list of demands included $1.5 million in the budget for the film reserved for private jets, a fully equipped gym, deluxe hotel suites, limousines, personal bodyguard, and 20% of gross receipts on ticket sales, DVDs, TV rights, game licensing, and in-flight movie licensing on the movie worldwide. It's like he expected them to say no. But they gave him all he asked for, so he returned and as a result, gave a performance unworthy of the previous two. There are even scenes where he forgets he's supposed to be playing a robot. Linda Hamilton was smart enough to dodge a bullet after she read the script and saw that her character was going to die halfway through the movie and won't even get a funeral. They wanted to treat her character like an afterthought and she refused to be a part of that. Thank God. As a result, a franchise that was brought to life through pure passion for filmmaking turned into just another Hollywood blockbuster. Don't get me wrong, this movie is not atrocious or anything, it's got some fun elements. For example, they brought back Sam Winston, who had worked on the first two, and he recreated the same practical effects. And even though there was some use of special effects, most of the film still felt real and tangible, and that was nice to see. But Mostow is no James Cameron. His action sequences felt less exciting, and this is where I bring up one of my biggest issues with this movie, and that is the TX Terminator. They tried a different design to the T-1000 and gave it an upgrade so that our main characters once again can be the underdogs we love to root for. But they went too far with the design. You cannot have a Terminator that shoots stuff out of its hands, because anytime it doesn't use them when it's close to our main characters, it gets ridiculous. The T-1000 was more powerful than our main heroes, but Cameron gave it limits, just enough to justify the fact that the protagonists always get away. Here, there are a couple of times they should have been killed but somehow survived. But that's not my biggest problem with the film. Since we are talking about the franchise in general, I have to mention how absolutely pointless this film is. It's got no reason to exist at all. Kate Brewster is a pointless character. You can literally remove her from the movie and everything still makes sense. She sends a T-800 in the past. John Connor could have been the one to do it. Her father can shut down Skynet. It could have been just another random guy. Him being her father doesn't move the story in any way. Just like her being John Connor's spouse adds nothing to the mythology. Her relationship with John Connor is completely underdeveloped, and I cannot help but feel like this movie had nothing to say. And you can see how much it relies on our knowledge of who these characters are thanks to the previous two films, and put no effort into developing them here. And that's where most of the problems in this franchise start. It's just doing what the first two movies did. Send the Terminator to kill a character, then there's another one to protect that character. Then it's a cat and mouse chase for the rest of the film until they inevitably destroy the Terminator after them. But here, these events lead nowhere. In the first one, the story was about Sarah Connor's development and the birth of John Connor. In T2, it was about stopping Judgment Day while developing the characters even further. In Terminator 3, we witness Judgment Day, but for no reason. There's no message, no theme, nothing. Just bland characters, an underdeveloped romance, and a pointless sequel that would set the stage for how not to do a Terminator movie.
Talk to the hand.
Terminator Salvation had potential. No, really. After T2, it was clear that there was nothing left to do in present day, but even despite going to the future, the franchise was not done being obsessed with what came before. Terminator Salvation had many problems, including director Mike G, who directed this piece of trash and failed to inject some life into this project. Christian Bale, who completely phoned in his performance, probably due to the fact that he realized about halfway through filming that he made a terrible mistake, which led to his infamous on-set meltdown.
I want you off the f***ing set, you prick!
I'm sorry.
No, don't just be sorry. Think for one fucking second. The f*** are you doing? Are you professional or not?
Yes, I am.
Do I walk around and rip that? No, shut the up, Bruce.
This movie was a disaster from a filmmaking perspective first and foremost. It looks like John Connor was never supposed to be the focus. Marcus was, but then Christian Bale got cast and the focus shifted. Except John Connor has no arc. He doesn't evolve or grow. Marcus has an arc, but it feels like most of it was cut or erased to give more screen time to John Connor, and at the end we got a very messy film with more poorly developed romance, bland visuals, and inventive action sequences. I mean, how can this scene from 1984 look more exciting than something that came out 25 years later? Don't even get me started on that stupid ending, but I mean it when I say it should have been good if they just did things right. Number 1, forget about the past movies, for Christ's sake! Focus on this futuristic world, no Kyle Reese, until maybe the very end to set up a potential sequel. Do not mention any plot points related to the first two movies, just give us Saving Private Ryan or Axel Ridge but with robots. It's not that complicated, guys. The reason most prequels fail is because they are obsessed with justifying past movies. How did Han Solo get his name? How did Nick Fury come up with the Avengers name? How did John Connor get his car? The answer to this question is we don't care. It doesn't matter. Stop making prequels answer questions we never asked. But that's a topic for another day. Believe me when I tell you that I have seen cats with more personality than Jai Courtney. Like, seriously, he is really bad in this movie. You can see Emilia Clarke and Arnold Schwarzenegger trying to save the movie from him in pretty much every scene they are in together. But Genisys as a Terminator film, how is it? I think that's where the franchise died for me. I stopped believing. They finally got Arnold Schwarzenegger to care about a Terminator movie again. He gives his best performance since T2. They got Emilia Clarke playing young Sarah Connor. And unlike T3, they actually tried something different. Yes, they referenced the previous movies so much you would think this was directed by J.J. Abrams, but at least it was a bit more unpredictable. However, the movie falls apart when it gets lost in its convoluted plot. Here, once again, Judgment Day is the biggest threat, but unlike what happened in T3, they managed to stop it again, which doesn't make the movie completely pointless. The characters are not as bland as they are in the previous two. I really enjoyed the relationship between Sarah Connor and the T-800. I think that was one of the few aspects of the film that actually worked. But the problem of these movies still persists. There's no reason for this movie to exist. They even had the audacity to pretty much erase the first two films from the timeline. They replaced Michael Biehn with Jai Courtney and Linda Hamilton with Emilia Clarke, and this was the new timeline we were supposed to accept as the new definitive version. What a downgrade. Don't even get me started on the character assassination of John Connor. Out of all the T2 sequels, I think this one is the one that broke me. I expected pretty much all the others to be terrible, but this time it was different. James Cameron was back on board as a producer. He wasn't directing, so that was definitely alarming, but they got Tim Miller, the guy behind the first Deadpool and behind this. I was convinced everything was going to work out perfectly. We were going to get a fresh and inventive sequel to T2. Linda Hamilton was back as Sarah Connor. She still looks badass. Arnold Schwarzenegger was coming back as the T-800. Terminator is back, baby! Oh, for f***'s sake! I could not believe it. Genisys erased the first two films. This was supposed to repair that. But within the first 10 minutes, this movie gives the biggest middle finger to its audience, and it hurts even more that it is James Cameron's idea. I actually feel bad for director Tim Miller, who had a very interesting idea regarding this film. In his early pitch, he wanted the new Skynet, Legion, to be winning in the future. So instead of the machines sending someone back in time to kill the future leader of the resistance, it would be the humans sending someone back to destroy Skynet, or in this case, Legion, before it's born, and the machines would send the Terminator back as well to stop that human from succeeding. I know it's a little bit derivative, but it is better than James Cameron just wanting to remake his own movie again. Tim Miller is clearly a fan and has that hunger and desire Cameron lost, and should have been allowed to make whatever movie he had in mind without Cameron's big ego getting in the way. And as crazy as it sounds, James Cameron has become another problem for this franchise, or at least one of the biggest reasons this movie was what it was. The only explanation I could come up with is that James Cameron doesn't care about these characters anymore. He was done with them 28 years ago. He saw an opportunity to make some money and took it. That's why he didn't direct it. He just decided they were going to remake Terminator 2, but with an all-women team this time. But before that, T2 had to be terminated. And I was so disappointed. Why not continue where we left off? Get Edward Furlong back in there. Show us what they've been up to all this time. And maybe have them go on a quest to stop a cyborg that was sent by Skynet before Judgment Day was stopped. And now they must stop this robot from recreating Skynet. Have them be the ones chasing the machine for once. We didn't need the same story to be told yet again. And I thought Cameron of all people would understand that. I have no interest in talking about this as a movie, because this movie doesn't matter. It's not even about what I wanted to see, it's about what I did see. Characters were bland again. The plot was recycled again. Another movie obsessed with the past that adds nothing to the mythology. If you are going to kill off John Connor, fine, just make sure something intriguing comes out of it. But here, the only reason they did it was to replace John Connor and just tell the same story again. As a fan, I felt insulted. Bringing new characters was a good idea, but only if they feel new and different or interesting. All three characters are pretty much Sarah Connor. The cyborg is the badass Sarah Connor from T2. They just made her a bit more powerful and a lot less likable. This girl is Sarah from the first movie, the scared woman who evolves throughout the film to become a strong character. The twist is instead of giving birth to the future leader of the resistance, she is the future leader. And then we have Linda Hamilton playing old Sarah Connor. The plot is too familiar to even care about anything at this point. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is back, and this movie completely ruins the concept of a T-800 for me. Skynet is also back, but with a new name? They have a new Terminator as the bad guy, but there's two of them in one flesh this time? What's fascinating about this movie is that it did everything all the other films have done and failed. It became what it was meant to destroy. But they thought a few different changes, a few different designs and changing names here and there would fool everyone this time. But honestly, I think this could be even worse than T3, Genisys and Salvation for the simple reason that it didn't even try. It may not be the worst in the franchise on a filmmaking perspective, but it is definitely the laziest film made in the franchise. And not even James Cameron was able to bring this franchise back to life because even he lost his passion for it. And this is what this franchise truly misses. After the second film, what this franchise needed wasn't more of James Cameron. He was done. It's just like Star Wars doesn't necessarily need more George Lucas to be great. The Terminator franchise needs someone who loves this franchise and these characters and has as much vision and passion Cameron had when making the first one. Cameron made the first Terminator with little to no experience as an Hollywood filmmaker. It's like Christopher Nolan making Inception his first film. That's crazy. He had that hunger, something to prove, and the franchise lost it after all the success Cameron got after the second film. His head just wasn't in it anymore, and that's fine. But without Cameron, Terminator became a studio-mandated franchise and not a particular person's vision. And today, after Dark Fate, it is sad to admit that it might be too late for this franchise. I don't believe the story of Terminator is necessarily done, even though T2 had a perfect ending. Return of the Jedi was the perfect conclusion, yet we still got the sequel trilogy for Star Wars. Regardless of what you think of them, they happened and had some interesting ideas. And after that, we got The Mandalorian, a fresh take that explores a different side of the Star Wars universe. Toy Story 3 had a perfect ending as well. That didn't stop Toy Story 4 from being truly great. Stories are limitless. All it takes is good writing and people who care and love the characters. Someone who loves these characters wouldn't do this.